Welcome back, AP. So, let's go ahead and get into it. We're going to try not to spend too long on this stuff and kind of wrap up all the English things. This one should be about like 20-ish minutes, give or take. And, just in that nice little like gray area of time, so Shane's Lad can do his flip while he's waiting for the 1 o'clock game and 4 o'clock game buffer zone, right? Now, this right here, great imagery of the English Civil War that's going to erupt after Charles the First tries to arrest those 5 members of Parliament after, not convicting them, but accusing them of starting rebellions in both Ireland and in Scotland, right? So, going into it, though, after Charles flees out of embarrassment and establishes his army, we've got two forces fighting against each other. We've got the new model army Roundheads and the old model army, the Cavaliers, right? And we talked about really quick in class the other day how the new model army was given the nickname of the Roundheads due to the shaved heads of their assistants and their scribes, also probably to they just did not have the money to afford long, luxurious hair like the Cavaliers did. And then the old model army was made up mostly of the gentry, or the wealthy. Also had some major Scottish supporters due to the fact that the Scottish crown was also pretty loyal to the royalists. You know what I'm talking about. Mercenaries, cavalry members, called the Cavaliers because they actually are supposed to be a play on the word cavalleros, which is this way to try and accuse them of being kind of foreign, right? So the Cavaliers, though, of course, looking like this, and the Roundheads looking like that. Obviously, just looking at these guys, you know for a fact that it doesn't look like the Cavaliers are that tough. All right, now, getting into it, though, apparently, early on, the Cavaliers had some minor success, like at the Battle of Edge Hill, right? The Battle of Edge Hill, the Royalists actually had the chance to, establish a little bit of dominance. But then came in the guy, Oliver Cromwell, a devout Puritan leader and general. Okay, so think about Oliver Cromwell, right? Give me 1 second. Cancel this for about 2 seconds. Some background tasks. All right, so a devout Puritan leader and general, right? Also, very goofy looking dude, but we're not going to get into that right now. So what's going on in this entire war, though? You've got Charles I battling against Oliver Cromwell, right? So in the long run, though, at the Battle of Naseby, one final decisive blow is going to be dealt out to the Cavaliers, and they're going to end up losing the war, right? So Charles I and his forces end up losing after Charles I tried his best just to even restore the idea of his absolute authority. But also the funny thing about Charles is he's just kind of a pitiful person, right? So because he grew up very sickly as a kid, and he would run exercise to try and build up his muscles. He had a speech impediment that he would try to fix by putting pebbles in his mouth to practice talking without slurred speech. And he only ever grew to be 5'4", and he actually really, really disliked his dad. I know this stuff right now is making Danielle go oh, Charles, because she's a big Charles I fan, because she thinks it's funny. But bye, sweetheart, I love you. Bye. So the fact that Charles I also hated the practice of his father. You know what I mean? James I was very well known for a lot of things, right? So establishing some colonies, we'll get to that later. Doing a lot of things reintroducing these very, very fabulous, grandiose ideas of a king, right? He actually had the entire palace at Whitehall, okay? The palace where the kings and the royals actually lived at the time was called Whitehall, right? Palace of Whitehall, rebuilt with a grand banquet hall, and it had a picture of him wearing, as a baby being crowned by, the god and all this other crazy stuff. And, just trying to bring the fabulousness back to the authority. And he had this big grand court where there would be young men that he was into and young women that he was into and all the da-da-da. And Charles hated that stuff. And he tried to push against it. And he just tried to he wanted absolute authority but did not want to lose the country, right? But he ends up getting kind of royally screwed over and then just ends up losing this entire Civil War. Poor guy. Now, what's going to end up happening immediately after everything goes down, they keep Charles alive. They tell Charles, all right, you're the political prisoner. We are not going to allow you to be king with absolute authority right now. You're still the king, but we're just not going to kill you, right? So immediately what happens is Oliver Cromwell comes in, and he begins to fire all of the former supporters of Charles and the supporters of James and tries to create a parliament that is devout. Whoa, Where are we going? All right, so that is devoutly loyal to him, right? So he actually purges it of any like non-puritanical members, and he establishes this thing called the Rump Parliament. A super conservative legislative government structure with the name Rump. Illuminati confirmed. Oh no. All right, so getting into it though, very, very conservative government status. He held a trial also, and he constantly advocated for Charles I to be executed, right? So actually, fun fact about it was he gave Charles multiple chances. Cromwell gave Charles multiple chances to relent his power. And he said, you need to be able to be checked by our rump parliament. You are not allowed to control the military anymore. You're not allowed to control any tax revenue. You're not allowed to prison people without just cause. You are basically going to be a stamped down figurehead. And Charles refused to give in, refused to relent, refused to give in. And so what Cromwell does is like, all right, you want to play that game? He holds a trial, and by a narrow margin, Parliament votes for Charles's execution. And Charles would actually die in a very, very OG kind of way. He actually wore 2 shirts because it was a cold day that afternoon. I think it's 1648 or 1649. Very cold day that afternoon, so he wore 2 shirts because he didn't want to shiver, because he didn't want people to think he was weak, right? He also apparently gave a very emboldened speech where he said, I believe that I am not guilty of the crimes of which I am being accused, etc., etc., etc. And in the back of his mind, he still blamed himself for signing the death warrant of one of his closest advisors under pressure from the parliament. And he thought this was like a karmic intervention of it, right? So he actually even got down on his own knees without having to be pushed by the executioner and laid his own head down on the block for the axe swing to come through. And here's the kicker. He was executed out front of the renovated Palace of Whitehall that he hated so much because of what his dad did to it. So Cromwell has him executed, right? It's just such a brutal way to go. Now, Cromwell then establishes this thing called the Commonwealth, right? So now the Commonwealth included Britain and Ireland. All right, so Britain and Ireland. Ireland, of course, being the area that had been taken over by Henry VIII, many areas like that. Now, the thing about the Commonwealth is it did not include Scotland, all right? Just keep that in the back of your mind. It didn't include Scotland because, remember, the Scottish actually they were loyal to the Stuarts, right? The Stuarts were the kings of Scotland. So whenever Charles was executed, when that all finally kind of fell through, they lost Scotland, right? And what you would see is this big transition to like the House of Commons being the de facto now monarchy, right? So no more kings. But Cromwell also purged this gigantic, really, really aggressive Puritan model society where he's like, no more bars, no more drinking, no more brothels, no more jewelry, no more theater, banished Catholics to Ireland. He did all these insanely crazy stuff. He outlawed like horse racing, cockfights, everybody's just trying to have a good time. I mean, I can understand outlawing cockfights. So I think he also outlawed bull baiting and all kinds of other gambling, anything he believed to be excessive, right? So, and we'll get to something else he outlawed, which I know for a fact Emily O'Donnell, when I say what he outlawed, is going to flip out. And she's going to hate Oliver Cromwell for that reason. Now, anyway, and of course, this is Cromwell's goofy face right there. That's his death mask, actually, after he died back in the day. It was very, very popular to have a death mask made of your face. And then also right here, something to talk about Cromwell real quick, is Cromwell viewed himself as this Commonwealth rump parliament, big, no need for a king kind of a thing. But Cromwell was kind of odd in his own sense. He actually began to resent the rump parliament because he said that, we'll get to it in a minute. He actually began to resent the rump parliament because he said, you're not even getting the job done well enough as I could, right? And so this right here is actually a portrait that used to be of Charles the First. Actually, it's not this one. It's, hold on, let me look it up for you. So really quick, Charles First portrait, Cromwell. All right, so there was actually a very, very famous painting of Charles on his horse that was actually redone with, there it is, with Cromwell's face on it. It's so hard to find. We're just going to, Man, you're making me upset. All right, so we're just going to gun it and say it's this one for now. But just to give you like a little bit of key insight, Cromwell resented the kingship idea, resented the absolute authority idea. But then ironically enough, even so, is going to kind of treat himself more like a king, right? So in one of these paintings he actually had done, where it would be actually Charles's face would be painted over with his face, right? So you're putting yourself in the position of that king, literally putting yourself on one of his portraits, right? The only big difference is he added like the puritanical collar, all right? So, but he did one positive thing. He allowed the Jews to come back. Yay, Jews, right? Like he allowed the Jewish people to come back to England. It's one of his more devoutly, like intrinsically positive things. And then all of his stuff, because he actually converted England to a republic. Somewhere nearby your Cromwell stuff, right? England was changed to a republic. Under the Rump Parliament, England was considered a republic, actually being ran by a legislative body, right? So, ironically enough, then this guy came around, Thomas Hobbes. I know all of you that have had Buchanan before know exactly who Thomas Hobbes is, right? Thomas Hobbes, the political leader and philosopher that modeled after Cromwell. And what I mean by modeled after Cromwell is he actually resented the idea of Cromwell and the Republic, right? Thomas Hobbes actually wrote this book called The Leviathan while he was actually out in exile in France. And the key concept is you need your authoritarian government and the social contract. He advocated for absolutists. He was like, an absolutist is the best thing ever. Have you met the Bourbons? Now, his big thing, though, is he said the social contract is as follows. According to the Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes, he believes that men inherently are disgusting, that they're evil, they're gross, and that they don't, and I don't mean men like the gender, I mean men like, and humankind is like a bad, bad thing to leave unchecked. And the only way that you can actually keep things peaceful is by having an authoritative governor, right? This is actually the cover of the Leviathan. And as you can see, the king being made up of his people holding the sword and his ruling authority in either hand, and he is the man of his people, right? So basically referring to the fact that he believes that the social contract goes as follows. You let go of those personal powers in exchange for peace, and you let that authoritarian do his job. Whereas other people would disagree, like J.J. Rosé, Jean-Jacques Rousseau says later on that the social contract is actually that the king owes it to his people to be fair, right? So, but the social contract is a very key concept, right? Now, following forward after like Thomas Hobbes and the Leviathan and these ideas of an authoritarian government keep pushing forward, Oliver Cromwell begins to resent the Rump Parliament. He's like, you guys aren't even doing the job of which I've asked you to do. And so he actually abolishes his Rump. Why is my Dwayne cam messing up so bad? So bad. Here, I'll tell you what, we're going to put me down here just to be safe. All right, so anyway, there we go. So he actually abolishes the Rump Parliament and then sets up everything as a military dictatorship that he calls the Protectorate. And then he called himself the Lord Protector. He basically, in the political spectrum, has just gone so far to the right that he's coming all the way back around to the other side, right? So he called himself the Lord Protector. He made it so that when he dies, his son takes over, right? The Hobbes leader everyone was looking for says is what he was advocating. He divided England into 12 military districts, and generals actually led everything. The new model army never even relinquished. Basically, Cromwell was just like, all right, we're just going to let the army be in charge of everything. And your general was in charge of tax collection, judges, juries, executioners, all of it, right? He enforced Puritan ideas of morality and work. And what I mean by work is there were certain jobs that were acceptable for people to have. Puritans believed that you could have jobs that were handmade, creating something on your own and selling your wares. Not like manufacturing things or making poor people manufacture things for you. Puritan jobs were like button maker, saddle maker, glove maker, shoe maker, chicken man. All right, so like chicken man I think would be the one that I would want to do. Chicken man. And not like I have feathers on and I'm like, but I'm actually like raising chickens. So a lot of different things that he actually does. And he just starts kind of spinning wildly out of control. And Cromwell starts to get really aggressive. And he starts like massacring Catholics in Ireland, right? Because remember, the Irish remained devoutly Catholic and they refused to relent. So he's like, if you're not going to relent, fine. And he starts to invade Ireland and parts of Scotland and go after different like people and Presbyterian communities and say, you're being too Catholic right now. And he actually, the story goes is that in Ireland, 40% of their population died from famine, starvation, or disease, right? From these gigantic influx of, like, the New Model Army attacking them, okay? Executed priests, so much so that there actually began to be this, like, really popular practice of trying to hide your Catholic priest. So, like, not like hide and seek, hide your Catholic priest, but there actually ended up being these things called priest holes, right? Priest holes in, like, some wealthy houses that actually remained Catholic, where they would actually hide their priest down underneath the floor, so when, like, the New Model Army came through to try and find them, they would be able to be hidden. So, fun fact about it, guess who else was hiding in one of those at the time? So this entire time while this is going on, in like a little parenthesis somewhere, just somewhere nearby, when all of this crazy stuff is happening, Charles I's son is just trying to survive, right? He's like the pauper prince. He's this kid that, like, it was actually the child of Henrietta. Plot twist, right? Charles had a son. Charles had a son that he actually grew up with his mom the entire time, and his name was Charles also. He was going to eventually, hopefully, be able to take back the throne. He actually started even 2 civil wars following all of this stuff, where he led rebellions against Cromwell and the Rump Parliament and the Lord Protector, right? He tried to actually, like, install his own thing. And also, guess what? He's secretly Catholic. So just remember, he's out there, right, while all this is going on. So he created also, but Cromwell, while all this stuff is happening, creates, like, the ultimate disdain between Ireland and England, right? Like, he actually created that vibe of, like, the English being the destroyers of Ireland, not the, like, encouragers of them. And I'm sorry, but even Cromwell banned Christmas. He banned mincemeat pies, too, because he said that they were gross and too Catholic-y. Now, he banned Christmas because of the popular English tradition of the 12 days of Christmas. My true love gave to thee, right? So what ends up happening is the first day of Christmas then goes to 12 days into the after, like, around mid-November, or like right after New Year's, right? So in the 12 days of Christmas, you were supposed to be in England. It's a celebratory thing. And every day for the 12 days of Christmas, when shops are closed, you go out, you gamble, you hang out, you apparently a lot of sexual immorality and all this other stuff. And so he banned Christmas as a whole part of it. He's like, Christmas? Nah. You know what's going to happen now on Christmas? You're going to fast and go to, like, 6 masses a day. How do you like me now? Like, so he actually banned Christmas. Like, I don't even like Christmas, but that's messed up. Now, also, he did this. He enforced and created these things called the Navigation Acts, right? So for those of you who had US 1 or honors US 1 with Miss Power, or if you had, like, AP US, you know what the Navigation Acts are already. The Navigation Acts were an embargo act that forced the English colonies that already existed, by the way, I intentionally didn't bring them up yet, to try and actually make it so they had to trade with only the English, right? Because what country was running around making mad money off of a lot of, like, English exports from the colonies? That's exactly right, Haley. The Dutch. The Dutch West Indies Company was actually shipping that stuff back and forth from the colonies, and their East India Company was making mad money as well. So Oliver Cromwell says, you know what, Dutch, go away, and, like, sends them packing and says, you can only trade with English ships. All items from the colonies must go on English ships. Now, here's the thing. The colonies, he wasn't that big of a fan of them, right? So, because here's the thing. The colonies were actually started by Charles and James. Jamestown, 1610, right? So, the first colonization attempt was Roanoke, and that was actually under Elizabeth and Sir Walter Raleigh, right? So, but the thing about it, that failed, and it was a big flop. So, but then Jamestown, the Puritans that had actually established themselves in Plymouth were driven out by James and Charles. The Carolinas are actually named after Charles, right? So the Navigation Acts were a really big deal because the growing English money that was going on in the colonies, right? So, and then everyone got sick and tired of all this Cromwell shenanigans. Eventually, Cromwell is going to die, right? So Cromwell actually died, and after multiple English civil wars, the Protectorate failed, right? Because actually who took over, that's supposed to say Cromwell, not Crowell, not Miss Kroll or anything like that. So what actually ended up happening is Oliver Cromwell put his son in charge after him, Robert Cromwell. But Robert Cromwell was a crappy leader and actually was very weak-willed. And also the Parliament in general was just like, man, life under this is awful. There's like no fun whatsoever. I don't like it. And who did we say was running around out in the distance, being crowned the king of the Scots the entire time and trying to take the throne back? That's right, Charles II. So in 1660, the old English government was restored, and they brought Charles II, son of Charles I, right back. Wait, What? Yeah, that's right. They went right back. After all of that headache, they went straight back to the old way of doing things. Now, the thing is, though, is that the Parliament kind of like chicken winged or like headlocked like Charles a little bit out the gate, right? Brought back because they forced him. They were like, you have to bring back both houses of Parliament. You had to also swear your allegiance to the Anglican Church. But here's the thing, a little plot twist action for you. Charles II, let's talk about his personality a little bit. First of all, he was raised by his very warm, very loving mother, Henrietta, who was actually Charles I's wife, who when he actually started the Civil War, she fled to France, right? So where she's from originally. And remember, what faith is she? Very nice job, Kieran. I heard you over there. She's Catholic, right? So he actually began to grow very fond of Catholicism. Remember I told you about the priest holes, right? Like you would actually hide your priest under your house if you actually were like secret at-home Catholic. He had to hide in one of those one time. He actually tried to start a fight when he was crowned King of Scotland before the Protectorate ever failed, right? Before it all like went belly up and everybody was like, Cromwell, this guy is not fun, right? So he actually tried to lead a small insurrection, which was like the Third English Civil War, against Cromwell, but Cromwell's army like smoked him, right? Like completely destroyed him. And while he was running away, he actually ended up in a wealthy family's home in Wales, and they actually hid him inside of a priest hole with their priest. And the priest actually like gave him some things to read because they had to sit in silence. And the things he read and the conversations they had in whispered, hushed tones, he was like, I love being Catholic. Let's go Catholic. I think I'm going to lighten up these rules on the Catholics when I become back to power, because he actually was convinced that he would eventually come back to power. There's also two things that, ironically enough, he's not the best Catholic on the planet, because guess what Charles's biggest things were? He's a lot like his grandfather James. He had two loves in life. Not pretty young men, though. He had the love of tennis. He loved tennis. And he also loved women. Like, he actually had so many kids that were not marriage, like, material. He was actually, we believe, addicted to women. All right? So he actually had, like, a dozen illegitimate kids. It's ridiculous. Now, biggest things about Charles, though, when he was actually restored, he has two huge problems when he gets there out the gate. Number one, his attitude towards Puritans and Catholics. He's got to figure this out, right? So, and also his relationship with Parliament. So how is he going to deal with Parliament? How's he going to deal with all this religious division, right? Well, one of his big religious divide things he actually decides to do that pisses Parliament off a lot up front is he marries a Portuguese Catholic, right? Now, ironically enough, though, guess how many kids they have? 0, because she does not like him, because she's like, he's off being busy with all these other women, and we're not going to have any kids, so And she stays there, but they don't even stay in the same room. They have barely any contact, so they didn't even have kids together, right? So he actually is going to have to put his brother in line next, James II, all right? So, but don't worry about that right now. So one of the big things he tries to do for his attitudes towards the Puritans and the Catholics, he knows that he's got to try and make a big statement, that he's going to be all Anglican and stuff like that, even though he's basically denying his Catholic roots, and he knows deep down inside he wants to be Catholic. The problem is that he issues this thing called the Test Act, right? Now, the Test Act was a massive failure, and it blew up in his face because he actually outlawed political influence and teachings of any other religions outside of Anglicans, right? It didn't work at all, though, because of the religious turmoil and all the different groups that were popping up in England, right? Remember I told you about the Puritan virus, right? The Protestant virus that was going on in England. It was going, and it was just always there. William Penn actually had a huge meeting with his friends, because he was a Quaker, and like the Friends Society, he had a huge meeting, and they arrested him and put him on trial, but the jury refused to convict him because they were like, we don't care. How you like me now, Charles? So the Test Act was actually a massive failure. And then also, his relationship with Parliament failed kind of up front as well. Charles was determined to work with Parliament, but he actually did not get along with them very much because, remember, deep down inside, he was actually secretly Catholic, right? So also, his brother James was openly Catholic, which was a big red flag for a lot of people. Now, here's the thing, though. Funny fact about this whole thing is his relationship with Parliament were very deteriorative, and he wanted actually a larger income at one point, and he wanted more money to be able to do what he wanted, but Parliament refused. And so he called up his first cousin, Louis XIV of France. Louis XIV, being his first cousin, was like, "But I need some money." And Louis was like, "I tell you what, I'll pay you an allowance every year, right? But you have to lighten up the rules on the Catholics, and you have to convert at some point openly and bring England back to Catholicism." And he agrees to it, but he dies before he ever actually gets the chance to do it. Well, actually, on his deathbed, he took his first and last Eucharist and actually was a Catholic while he was dying, so no one in England ever found out about it. So he basically just ripped off Louis XIV for a lot of money. But, whoa, that's not the son. It's supposed to be James II, brother of Charles I. Wait, son of Charles I. Yeah, sorry, my bad. His other son, James, assumes the throne after Charles. Now, here's the biggest problem. Everyone begins to freak out about this immediately because James is an open Catholic. So what ends up happening is, fearing a return to Catholicism, James starts appointing Catholics to high offices and positions of the army, violating the Test Act fervently, right? So that's another big failure, right? It just couldn't hold up. It was non-enforceable. So, fearing a return to Catholicism, Parliament convinces James II's daughter, Mary, who is a devout Anglican, because she's living with her Dutch husband, William of Orange, to challenge James. And what he does, orange means you're like a protector, right? It means you're a protector of the realm. The title of being an orange is actually like a general's title. So the Dutch husband, William, challenges James and says, if you don't get out of here, I'm bringing the entire fury of the Dutch army on top of you, which had recently beaten England in two Anglo-Dutch wars, right? Because they're a really, 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 really awesome naval fleet. The Dutch are killing it right now, right? So write that down really quick. They had recently beaten England in like two wars. The first Anglo-Dutch War and the second Anglo-Dutch War. The second Anglo-Dutch War, actually, Louis XIV was involved in, but like it failed miserably because they like were scattered all over the place. Now, Parliament convinces James, though, James's daughter Mary, to call up her boyfriends like, we have to go oust my father. James is going to end up fleeing to France under Louis XIV, and William and Mary assume the throne. But here's the crazy part. Not a drop of blood was spilled. And really quickly, you can go ahead and just like kind of pause me or something like that, because I think that's pretty much, yeah. You can go ahead and pause me or whatever really, really quick, right? And then you can jot this stuff down, and this is pretty much where it's going to end. We're just kind of wrapping up all the stuff in England, right? So William and Mary's bloodless ascension to the throne is known as the Glorious Revolution, right? Because the new reforms came down the English government. Parliament finally found in the Glorious Revolution the rulers that they wanted, right? Like, power was split between the Parliament and the king. The king had certain titles, and William would actually become king of England and rule dualistically with his wife Mary. The college William and Mary was actually like founded under their name. Now, power is split between the Parliament and the king. The Parliament had to be called under the Triennial Act at least once every 3 years. The parliamentary ceremonies of trying to show their ability to be a higher power than the king were established. The stuff we talked about with like the Black Rod and like the checking for the gunpowder and everything. They ratified the English Bill of Rights, which was huge as well, which actually set down the basic rights of men and women under the new English community. Law could not be suspended by the crown whatsoever, and they had to be called one time every 3 years. Oh, wait, that's already up there. So that's repeated twice. Don't write that twice. And then the crown was also not allowed to interfere with debate or any session of parliament. That is why when we talked about the parliamentary procedures, Emily O'Donnell, Tommy McBride, who else? We got Mia Nixon, Denny Kelly, all you guys that helped out with all that stuff. That's why the doors slammed shut when the House of Commons convenes, right? So after all of this stuff, England was able to remain immune to absolutism, right? Magna Carta, yay. And that right there is where we're going to kind of wrap up everything, all right? So very, very impressed. I'm really glad that y'all like the English stuff so much because I love it personally. I think it's awesome. And yeah, so that's it. We'll pick up on this. We'll pick up on some of this stuff on Monday when we talk about John Locke and then the Dutch a little bit as well. All right, so y'all have a good one. I'll see y'all later.